The stolen bicycle. The American sun burned over Louisville, Kentucky, as 12-year-old Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. pedaled his brand-new bicycle through the streets of the West End. The red and white Schwinn represented months of dreaming, weeks of begging, and finally, the joy of ownership that only a child in 1954 could understand. The bike meant freedom in a world that offered precious little of it to a black boy in the segregated South. He rode it to the Columbia Auditorium that October afternoon, where a black business expo promised free popcorn and hot dogs, and where hundreds of families gathered to celebrate their community despite the invisible walls that confined them to certain neighborhoods, certain schools, certain futures. When young Cassius emerged from the auditorium with his brother Rudolph, his stomach full and his spirits high, the bicycle was gone. Stolen. Vanished as completely as if it had never existed. The rage that filled him was not the simple anger of a disappointed child, but something deeper and more dangerous. Someone had taken what was his, and the powerlessness he felt in that moment would have destroyed a lesser soul. But Cassius Clay was not built for surrender. He stormed through the building, demanding to know where he could find a police officer, his voice rising with each passing minute, his fists clenching and unclenching, as if already preparing for a fight he did not yet know how to fight. Someone directed him to the basement of the auditorium, where Officer Joe Martin ran a boxing program in a converted gymnasium. Martin, a white policeman in his 30s, had been teaching young boys to box for years, believing that discipline and structure could save kids from the streets that claimed so many. When the angry boy appeared before him, practically vibrating with fury, and declaring that he was going to whip whoever stole his bicycle, Martin looked him over with the practiced eye of someone who had seen hundreds of tough-talking kids. The officer made a suggestion that would change the world, though neither of them could have known it then. He told young Cassius that before he went around whipping anybody, he had better learn how to fight. The next week, Cassius Clay returned to that basement gym. The stolen bicycle would never be recovered, but something far more valuable had been found. Martin saw immediately that the skinny kid possessed unusual dedication and an almost superhuman lung capacity that allowed him to maintain incredible speed round after round. More importantly, the boy wanted it with an intensity that burned in his eyes every time he laced up the gloves. Within 6 weeks, Cassius Clay won his first amateur fight, a 3-round split decision against another novice named Ronnie O'Keefe. The victory was unremarkable except for one thing: the boy had discovered his purpose. Louisville in 1954 was a city of contradictions, a border state that clung to Southern traditions while claiming Northern progress. The Clay family lived at 3302 Grand Avenue in the West End, a neighborhood where black families built middle-class lives within the confines of segregation. Young Cassius attended all-black schools, drank from colored water fountains, and understood from his earliest memories that certain doors would never open for him simply because of the color of his skin. Yet his parents, Cassius Marcellus Clay Sr. and Odessa Grady Clay, worked to provide stability and dignity. His father painted signs and murals, his artistic talent channeled into commercial work that paid the bills, while his mother cleaned houses when money grew tight, sacrificing her own comfort for her sons' futures. The name Cassius Marcellus Clay came from his father, who had been named after a 19th-century Kentucky politician and abolitionist. The historical Clay had been born into a slave-holding family, but became one of the South's most prominent advocates for emancipation, a white man who risked everything to fight for freedom. The irony of a black family bearing this name in segregated Louisville was not lost on those who knew the history, but the elder Clay wore it with pride, a reminder that resistance to injustice was part of their inheritance. Young Cassius would eventually reject the name as a slave name, but the spirit of defiance it represented would define his entire life. Training consumed him with a completeness that surprised everyone who knew him. While his brother Rudolph dabbled in boxing, young Cassius lived it. He rose before dawn to run through the streets of Louisville, his breath clouding in the winter air, his legs pumping mile after mile while his neighbors still slept. He trained at Martin's gym after school, then continued at the Grace Community Center under the guidance of Fred Stoner, a black trainer who taught him the science of boxing that Martin could not. Stoner showed him how to move with the grace and ease of a dancer, how to make his feet as important as his fists, how to transform boxing from a brutal exchange of punches into an art form. His schoolwork suffered dramatically without the critter of his hote from separated within Germanly right to the box. His informationly wasn't to make it was the doll, but it was the Mose to the 3 roly that she was lived. His many gudden of those forters was trangs to stret movement and with 'em along. His schoolwork suffered dramatically without the problem that means differently that they would be flitch under the school first. His school that his own carried of a lie, which it was no many that raisedly considerpy, how to fate for a popularity and the different of celebrated with his murd. His school believed that will work, she talked him the future of a boxing. His the logical work is go to the priced but the challenges and extone which held it still back. He didn't prevail with first philibing boxing, and allows in Jimenbull for the sherd. He's many a case with a different school as a belletit driven local channel, the days of an in-century taught with resility. His school, but the elder Clay sounded schoolwork suffered dramatically as boxing consumed every available moment. Teachers at Central High School watched helplessly as a bright student chose gloves over books, the ring over the classroom. He struggled with reading and writing in ways that suggested dyslexia, though the diagnosis would come much later. The printed words seemed to mock him, letters rearranging themselves on the page, sentences requiring superhuman effort to decode. But in the boxing ring, everything made perfect sense. His body understood what his mind sometimes could not grasp in conventional ways, and he poured all of his considerable intelligence into mastering the sweet science. Behind he reached 8 years old, Cassius Clay heads throughout the boxing world. 100 victories against only 8 losses. He dominated the light, heavyweight division with a style that seemed to violate every rule of orthodox boxing. He kept his hands low, inviting opponents to swing at his face, then pulled his head back with reflexes so quick that punches whistled through empty air. He moved around the ring with a fluidity that confused and frustrated everyone who faced him, jabbing from impossible angles, talking throughout the fight, predicting the round in which he would claim victory. The confidence was not merely an act, but a genuine belief in his own greatness that bordered on the supernatural. The 1960 Summer the Church, Olympics in Rome, represented the culmination of everything he had worked toward since that day his bicycle was stolen. At 18 years old, standing 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing 175 pounds, Cassius Clay traveled to Italy as part of the United States Olympic boxing team. The trip was his first journey outside America, his first experience of a world where the color of his skin did not automatically determine his place in society. In Rome, he could eat in any restaurant, stay in any hotel, walk any street without fear of being turned away or worse. The freedom was intoxicating and heartbreaking all at once, a glimpse of what life could be if America kept its promises. He fought his way through the Olympic tournament with a combination of skill and showmanship that captivated audiences. In the light heavyweight division finals, he faced Poland's Zbigniew Pietrzykowski, a tough veteran with 3 times Clay's experience. The fight went the full 3 rounds, and when the judges awarded the decision to the young American, Cassius Clay stood atop the podium as an Olympic gold medalist. He wore that medal constantly in Rome, even sleeping with it, a physical manifestation of achievement in a world that too often told young black men that greatness was beyond their reach. The legend would later spread that he threw the medal into the Ohio River in disgust after being refused service at a Louisville restaurant upon his return home. But this story's accuracy remains disputed among historians, a myth that captured an emotional truth even if the literal event never occurred. What is certain is that Cassius Clay returned to Louisville as a conquering hero, celebrated in newspapers and welcomed with parades. The Louisville Sponsoring Group, a syndicate of 11 wealthy white businessmen, offered to manage his professional career, providing financial support in exchange for a percentage of his future earnings. In October 1960, he signed the contract and turned professional under their guidance. His professional debut came that same month, a 6-round decision victory that marked the beginning of a journey toward the heavyweight championship of the world. Forging the greatest. Windshield. The professional ranks revealed what amateur boxing had only hinted at. Cassius Clay possessed something beyond talent. He possessed destiny. Fight after fight, he dismantled opponents with a style that defied conventional wisdom. Traditional boxing doctrine demanded that a fighter keep his hands up to protect his face, move forward behind a tight guard, and rely on power rather than speed. Clay violated every one of these sacred rules and won anyway. His reflexes so sharp that he could lean away from punches that would have demolished slower men. His footwork so elegant that he seemed to float across the canvas. He began to describe his style in verse, telling reporters and anyone who would listen that he could float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, words that would echo through sports history for generations. His mouth became as famous as his fists. The Louisville Lip predicted the rounds in which he would stop opponents, wrote childlike poetry that rhymed with nursery rhyme simplicity but cut with razor wit, and proclaimed himself the greatest, long before he had earned the right to such grandiosity. The boxing establishment hated him for it. Sports writers called him arrogant, classless, a disgrace to the dignified traditions of boxing. They longed for the quiet, humble champions of earlier eras, fighters who knew their place and accepted praise with appropriate modesty. But Cassius Clay refused to play that role, and his refusal was more than mere showmanship. It was a revolutionary act in 1960s America, a young black man declaring his own greatness in a country that insisted on black humility. Behind the public bravado, a spiritual hunger gnawed at him. The Baptist faith of his childhood felt hollow, rituals without meaning, promises without fulfillment. He attended services out of obligation but left empty, searching for something he could not name. In 1959, while fighting in the Golden Gloves tournament in Chicago, he first heard about the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist religious movement that preached racial pride and separation. The message intrigued him, though he did not pursue it immediately. In 1961, he began attending Nation of Islam meetings in Miami, where he trained, sitting in the back rows and listening to ministers preach that black people were the original humans, that white people were devils created by an evil scientist, that Islam was the true religion of black people, stolen from Africa and brainwashed into Christianity. The theology was unorthodox to the point of heresy by traditional Islamic standards, mixing Islamic terminology with racial mythology and apocalyptic prophecy. But for young Cassius Clay, struggling to find his identity in a racist society that simultaneously celebrated and denigrated him, the Nation of Islam offered something precious, a sense of dignity and purpose rooted in black excellence rather than white approval. He kept his involvement secret, understanding instinctively that revealing his membership could destroy his boxing career before it truly began. Promoters, sports writers, and television executives would never tolerate a heavyweight contender who belonged to an organization that mainstream America viewed as a dangerous cult preaching hatred and violence. 1962, his life changed forever when he met Malcolm X in Nevada. Malcolm, born Malcolm Little and known within the nation as Minister Malcolm X, served as Elijah Muhammad's chief disciple and the public face of the organization. Tall, thin, and fiercely intelligent, Malcolm possessed a charisma that rivaled Clay's own. When he spoke, The world listened, even when they hated what they heard. His analysis of American racism cut through liberal platitudes and conservative denial with surgical precision, naming the structures of oppression that kept Black Americans trapped in poverty and powerlessness. He articulated what many Black people felt but could not express, giving voice to rage that had been silenced for centuries. The connection between the young boxer was just in the earlier judgment, and the revolutionary minister was immediate and profound. Malcolm saw in Clay a potential champion who could use his platform to advance the cause of Black liberation. Clay saw in Malcolm a father figure, mentor, and guide who understood both his public greatness and his private doubts. They began spending time together whenever possible, Malcolm traveling to Clay's training camps, the two men talking for hours about faith, politics, race, and destiny. Malcolm taught him that being Black was not a source of shame, but of pride, that African heritage was something to celebrate rather than deny, that submission to white supremacy was a choice rather than an inevitability. Relationship transformed Clay's understanding of himself and his purpose. He began to see boxing not merely as a path to wealth and fame, but as a platform for challenging the very foundations of American racism. Malcolm implanted in his mind the belief that he was invincible, a conviction that would prove essential when he faced the most feared heavyweight champion in the world. But their friendship remained hidden from public view, both men understanding that revealing it prematurely could destroy everything they hoped to accomplish. Clay continued to play the role of the brash but ultimately harmless entertainer, while Malcolm worked behind the scenes to prepare him for the battles that lay ahead. By late 1963, Cassius Clay had earned the right to challenge Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship of the world. Liston was everything Clay was not: sullen, intimidating, connected to organized crime, and possessed of a punching power that had destroyed former champion Floyd Patterson in first-round knockouts in both of their fights. Liston's massive fists seemed capable of killing a man in the ring, and his dead-eyed stare promised violence without mercy. The boxing establishment saw him as an invincible force, a man whose physical gifts made defeat impossible. Bookmakers set the odds at 7-1 against Clay, and many observers feared not merely that the young challenger would lose, but that he might be seriously injured or killed. Clay launched a psychological warfare campaign that has never been equaled in boxing history. He showed up at Liston's home in the middle of the night, banging on the door and shouting challenges. He called the champion the Big Ugly Bear and promised to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee when they met in the ring. He disrupted the weigh-in ceremony, screaming and gesticulating wildly while his pulse supposedly skyrocketed, leading doctors to worry about his mental state. The performance was calculated to unsettle Liston, to make the champion believe he was facing a madman rather than a skilled boxer, to plant seeds of doubt in a mind accustomed to easy victories through pure intimidation. Freezes, 1st 25th, 1964. At the Convention Hall in Miami Beach, Florida, Cassius Clay entered the ring as a 22-year-old challenger whom almost nobody believed could win. Malcolm X sat in the audience, though he tried to remain inconspicuous, knowing that his presence could cause the fight to be cancelled if reporters made too much of it. The opening bell rang, and Clay immediately demonstrated that everything he had promised was true. He moved with a speed that Liston could not match, throwing combinations that snapped the champion's head back, dancing away before Liston could counter. The supposed invincible force looked slow and confused, swinging at air while the young challenger peppered him with jabs and hooks. After 6 rounds of systematic dismantling, Liston quit. He claimed a shoulder injury prevented him from continuing, though many suspected that he simply could not endure the humiliation any longer. When the referees signaled the end of the fight, Cassius Clay exploded in triumphant rage, screaming into the microphone of radio reporter Howard Cosell, "I am the greatest! I am the king of the world!" The prediction had come true. The impossible had become reality. And the 22-year-old kid who everyone said talked too much had shocked the world. The name that changed everything. Benches. At the press conference, just days after defeating Liston, Cassius Clay confirmed the rumors that had been circulating for months. He had joined the Nation of Islam, embracing the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and rejecting what he called his slave name. He announced that he would now be known as Cassius X, a temporary designation awaiting a proper Islamic name from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad himself. The X symbolized the unknown African name that slavery had stolen from his ancestors, a placeholder for an identity that colonialism had destroyed. The boxing world reacted with horror and fury, seeing the transformation as a betrayal of everything they had invested in the photogenic young champion. Jimmy Cannon, one of the most influential voices in American sports journalism, wrote that he pitied Clay and abhorred what he represented, comparing the Nation of Islam's use of celebrities to the Communist Party's exploitation of famous people during the Great Depression. Other writers refused to use his chosen name, insisting on calling him Cassius Clay in their columns and broadcasts, a form of resistance that denied him the basic dignity of self-identification. But within the black community, particularly among those who had grown tired of the slow pace of civil rights progress and the constant demands for patience and non-violence, Clay's conversion was electrifying. Here was a young black man at the peak of his powers, standing before the world and declaring that he would not bow to white approval. On March 6, 1964, Elijah Muhammad bestowed upon him the name Muhammad Ali, which means beloved of Allah in Arabic. It was an honor rarely given to new converts, as most members of the Nation of Islam used X as their surname for years before receiving a completed Muslim name. The gesture signaled Elijah Muhammad's recognition of Ali's importance to the organization, his potential to serve as a public ambassador who could attract new followers and legitimize the nation in ways that Malcolm X never could. The heavyweight champion of the world was now Muhammad Ali, and he made it clear that he would not answer to any other name. Instructional, Malcolm X had been instrumental in guiding Ali toward the Nation of Islam, but by the time Ali won the championship, their relationship was already fracturing under pressures neither man fully controlled. Malcolm had learned that Elijah Muhammad, the man he revered as God's messenger, had fathered multiple children out of wedlock with young women in the organization, a violation of the strict moral code that the nation preached. When Malcolm tried to address this hypocrisy, Elijah Muhammad's family and inner circle turned against him viciously. They accused Malcolm of disloyalty and betrayal, of trying to destroy the nation through slander and lies. In December 1963, after Malcolm made controversial comments about President John F. Kennedy's assassination, Muhammad suspended him from speaking publicly for 90 days, a punishment that everyone understood was the beginning of a permanent exile. Malcolm watched as the nation's leaders, including Elijah Muhammad's son Herbert, positioned themselves to control Ali and his championship platform. They convinced Ali that Malcolm had become a hypocrite and a traitor, that his suspension proved his disloyalty to the messenger. Ali, only 22 years old and deeply devoted to Elijah Muhammad, accepted their version of events. When Malcolm reached out to him, hoping to maintain their friendship despite the political turmoil, Ali pulled away. The younger man could not conceive that the organization he loved might be manipulating him, that the father figure he trusted might be using him for purposes he did not understand. In March 1964, Malcolm X officially left the Nation of Islam, announcing that he would establish his own organization dedicated to working within the broader civil rights movement. He made a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of Islam in Saudi Arabia, where he experienced a transformation of his own understanding of the faith. He saw Muslims of all races praying together, white Muslims treating him with the brotherhood that America had never offered, and he began to question the racial theology that the Nation of Islam preached. He returned to America as El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, though the world still knew him as Malcolm X, and he dedicated himself to building a movement that could challenge American racism through international solidarity rather than racial separation. Ali and Malcolm crossed paths by chance in Ghana in May 1964. Ali was visiting Africa as part of a goodwill tour, reveling in the adulation of people who saw him as a symbol of black excellence and African pride. When he encountered Malcolm in the lobby of the Hotel Ambassador, the moment was devastating for both men. Malcolm approached with warmth and hope, seeing an opportunity to reconcile with the young champion he still considered a brother. But Ali, surrounded by members of the Nation of Islam who had poisoned his mind against Malcolm, turned his back on his former mentor. He looked at Malcolm's traditional Islamic white robes, his walking stick, his beard, and saw not the man who had shaped his consciousness, but a traitor who had betrayed the messenger. Malcolm left a note for Ali at the hotel desk, a final attempt to preserve something of their friendship. In it, he expressed his continuing love and belief that time would reveal the truth of what had happened. He forgave Ali for the rejection, understanding that the young man was caught in forces beyond his comprehension. For Ali, the encounter was confusing and painful. He had been taught to hate Malcolm as an enemy of Islam, but the genuine affection he felt for the man who had been like a father to him could not be entirely extinguished. The cognitive dissonance would haunt him for the rest of his life. Misuse. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. 3 gunmen, at least one of them confirmed to be a member of the Nation of Islam, shot him while he stood before an audience that had come to hear him speak. He died at age 39, his potential unfulfilled, his transformation incomplete. When reporters asked Ali about Malcolm's death, he expressed shock and surprise, but offered no real grief. On the day of Malcolm's funeral, Ali participated in a Nation of Islam-sponsored boxing exhibition in Chicago, clowning and joking as if nothing significant had happened. When a reporter suggested that Malcolm's followers might seek revenge against him, Ali bristled and asked what people, insisting that Malcolm had no people. The denial was a defense mechanism, a way of managing guilt and confusion that Ali did not know how to process. In private, and particularly in later years, he would express profound regret about how he treated Malcolm. He would acknowledge that Malcolm had been right to challenge Elijah Muhammad's hypocrisy, that the nation's leaders had manipulated him into abandoning his mentor, that his rejection of Malcolm in Ghana was one of his life's great mistakes. But in 1965, he was a young man trying to hold together a worldview that reality was pulling apart, and the only way he knew to survive was to believe what he had been told. In May 1965, Ali fought a rematch against Sonny Liston in Lewiston, Maine. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes into the first round, ending with what some called a phantom punch, a right hand that seemed to barely connect with Liston's jaw, yet dropped him to the canvas. Controversy surrounded the fight immediately, with some observers claiming that Liston took a dive, possibly under pressure from organized crime, or simply unwilling to endure another beating like the one he suffered in their first fight. Ali stood over the fallen champion, screaming at him to get up, one of the most iconic images in boxing history. Whether the punch was legitimate or the finish was fixed, the result was the same. Muhammad Ali had defended his title and proven that his first victory was no fluke. Over the next 2 years, Ali defended his championship 8 more times, defeating all challengers with a combination of skill and confidence that bordered on arrogance. He fought Floyd Patterson, who refused to call him Muhammad Ali and insisted on using his birth name throughout the build-up, leading Ali to punish him cruelly over 15 rounds rather than ending the fight quickly. He fought George Chuvalo, Henry Cooper, Brian London, Carl Mildenberger, and Cleveland Williams, each victory adding to his legacy and his legend. He was not just the heavyweight champion of the world, but the most famous athlete on the planet, instantly recognizable in every country, beloved by millions and hated by millions more. His popularity grew exponentially. The civil rights movement evolved and fractured. The non-violent tactics of Martin Luther King Jr. had achieved significant legislative victories, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But they had not eliminated racism or poverty. Younger activists were growing impatient with appeals to white conscience and demands for gradual change. They admired Ali's refusal to apologize for his blackness, his willingness to challenge white authority, his insistence that black people deserved respect rather than pity. He represented a new kind of black masculinity, one that did not seek white approval and did not measure success by white standards. The very qualities that made him a hero to some made him a target for others. The Federal Bureau of Investigation maintained an extensive file on him, monitoring his activities and associations as part of the COINTELPRO program, designed to disrupt and neutralize black nationalist movements. Director J. Edgar Hoover saw the Nation of Islam as a threat to national security and viewed Ali's championship platform as a tool for spreading dangerous ideas. The surveillance would continue for years, a constant reminder that his fame offered no protection from government suspicion and interference. The stand that shook the world. The Vietnam War transformed Muhammad Ali from the smoking the world, from the mirrors that wore the transformant. The stand that shook the world from the better of every single form. The stand that shook the world, the beginning that children from Christia of the ignition of the war. The stand that shook the world from the better of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the first Muhammad Ali from the general surface likely, in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the fear of better of every single form. The stand that shook the world, the beginning that children from changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the state of better of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough and personal of every single form. The Vietnam War transformed Muhammad Ali from the state of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the better of every single form in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world, the beginning the children from Christia of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the first Muhammad Ali from the general surface likely, in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the state of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The stand that shook the world. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The stand that shook the world. The stand that shook the world from the first Muhammad Ali from the general surface likely, in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the better of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The Vietnam War transformed Muhammad Ali from the first Muhammad Ali from the general surface likely, in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. The stand that shook the world from the person for the glow with not enough, and personal of every single form. Still, the person of this world, and the Cholam performant was hurt of letterly with the experts stilificated, and was hurt from leading a presson and from the data the development. Which make that the studge, that they made the most first and anyway, and what is the main worked with Muhammad Ali. The stand that shook the world from the better of every single form, in changing the truth. The stand that shook the world from the first Muhammad Ali, from the general surface likely, in changing the truth. Still, the person of this world, and the Chulam beformint was hurt of latterly with the experts delificated, and was hurt from leading of presson, and from the data the development. The strands formed Muhammad Ali from controversial champion into revolutionary icon. In 1964, he had been classified as 1Y by the United States Armed Forces, meaning he was fit for service only in times of national emergency. The classification came after he failed the Armed Forces qualifying test due to poor writing and spelling skills, a result of the dyslexia that had plagued him since childhood. He famously joked, "I said I was the greatest, not the smartest," turning his rejection into a source of humor rather than shame. For 2 years, the classification kept him safe from the military draft that was consuming thousands of young American men and sending them to die in the jungles of Southeast Asia. In early 1966, as the war escalated and casualties mounted, the military lowered its standards to meet recruitment quotas. Ali was reclassified as 1A, meaning he was eligible for immediate induction into the armed forces. When reporters asked him about the reclassification, he responded with words that would reverberate through American culture. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." The statement was spontaneous and unscripted, a simple expression of a truth that he had not fully articulated even to himself. He expanded on the thought in subsequent interviews, asking why he should travel 10,000 miles from home to drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam, while so-called Negro people in Louisville were treated like dogs and denied simple human rights. The reaction was swift and venomous. Mainstream media outlets condemned him as unpatriotic and ungrateful, a coward hiding behind religion to avoid his duty. Politicians called for his championship to be stripped. Veterans groups organized protests. Former supporters abandoned him, unable to reconcile their love of boxing with their support for the war effort. Even some civil rights leaders distanced themselves, worried that association with Ali would taint their own causes and give ammunition to those who accused the movement of communist infiltration. But Ali held firm, his conviction growing stronger as the pressure increased. His oppositions to the war was rooted in multiple layers of belief. The Nation of Islam preached that Muslims should not fight in wars waged by the American government, viewing such participation as allegiance to a nation that had enslaved and oppressed black people for centuries. Ali took these teachings seriously, seeing military service not as a duty but as a betrayal of his faith and his people. He filed for conscientious objector status, arguing that his religious beliefs forbade him from participating in warfare except in defense of Islam. He also recognized the fundamental injustice of asking black men to fight for freedom abroad when they did not enjoy freedom at home, a hypocrisy so glaring that pointing it out required no sophisticated analysis. 28th, 1967, Ali reported to the Armed Forces Examining and Entrance Station in Houston, Texas, for his scheduled induction ceremony. He had changed his legal residence to Houston earlier that year, after his local draft board in Louisville rejected his conscientious objector application. When the officer called his name, repeatedly commanding Cassius Marcellus Clay to step forward and accept induction, Ali refused to move. He stood silent and still, while the officer warned him that he was committing a felony, punishable by 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. 3 times the officer called his name, and 3 times Ali declined to step forward. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Within hours, the New York State Athletic Commission suspended his boxing license, and the World Boxing Association stripped him of his championship. Other state boxing commissions quickly followed suit, creating a nationwide ban that prevented him from fighting anywhere in the United States. His passport was confiscated, eliminating any possibility of fighting abroad. On May 8, 1967, a federal grand jury indicted him for draft evasion. On June 20, 1967, an all-white jury in Houston convicted him after deliberating for only 21 minutes. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, the maximum penalty allowed by law. The sentence was unusually harsh, clearly designed to make an example of him and discourage others from following his lead. The United States Congress, on the same day as Ali's conviction, voted 337 to 29 to extend the draft for 4 more years, and 385 to 19 to make flag desecration a federal crime, demonstrating the political climate in which his trial occurred. Public support for the Vietnam War was beginning to erode, with more Americans questioning the government's claims about progress and victory, and politicians feared that Ali could become a symbol for the growing anti-war movement. They were determined to crush him before his influence spread. Ali remained free on appeal, while his lawyers fought the conviction through the federal court system. The appeals process would take more than 3 years, during which time he could not box, but could not be imprisoned. He survived by speaking at colleges and universities, commanding fees that allowed him to support his family while spreading his message to a new generation. The college circuit exposed him to young people who were themselves questioning authority, rejecting the assumptions of their parents' generation, and building movements for peace and social justice. They saw in Ali a courage they wanted to emulate, a willingness to sacrifice everything for principles they were just beginning to discover. On June 4, 1967, shortly after Ali's conviction, a group of prominent African-American athletes gathered in Cleveland, Ohio, for what became known as the Cleveland Summit. Bill Russell, Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and others met with Ali at the Negro Industrial Economic Union to question him about the seriousness of his convictions and decide whether to support him publicly. The meeting lasted several hours, with the athletes challenging Ali's reasoning and examining his motives. They wanted to ensure that his draft refusal was genuine rather than a publicity stunt or a momentary lapse in judgment. Ali answered every question with a combination of religious conviction and political analysis that convinced them of his sincerity. When they emerged from the meeting, the athletes announced their support, lending their considerable credibility to his cause. The 3.5-31s, a long-time indebrated vegan that rifle groups for the Klaus. The cripple of Ali expected and the chap that was monsterly serve. The 3.5-33 was predicted them Danes working to weather them cause and doing out for the black of general for ceremony. The 3.5-30 spent in exile from boxing were the prime years of his athletic life. He was 25 years old when his title was stripped, at the peak of his physical abilities and technical mastery. Athletes in their mid-20s are entering the years when experience and physical gifts combine to produce greatness, when the body can still do everything the mind conceives, and the mind has learned enough to conceive brilliantly. Ali spent those years on college campuses and television talk shows instead of in boxing rings, his reflexes slowly eroding, his timing gradually declining, his body aging without the intense training that had kept him sharp. The financial sacrifice was equally severe. As heavyweight champion, he could have earned millions of dollars per fight, setting himself up for life while entertaining the world. Instead, he survived on speaking fees that, while substantial, represented a fraction of what he would have made in the ring. He could have apologized, could have agreed to serve in the military in some ceremonial capacity that would have kept him out of combat, could have found any of a dozen ways to compromise his principles for comfort and security. But he chose to stand firm, accepting poverty and obscurity rather than betraying what he believed to be right. In March 1971, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear his case. The appeal centered on whether the Justice Department had properly specified why Ali's conscientious objector application had been denied. The government had offered 3 reasons for the denial, but during oral arguments, government lawyers conceded that 2 of the reasons were invalid under existing precedent. The question became whether the 3rd reason alone could sustain the conviction, or whether the entire denial had to be thrown out because it was impossible to determine which reason the appeals board had relied upon. On June 28, 1971, the Supreme Court issued its decision in Clay v. United States. In a unanimous 8-0 ruling, with Justice Thurgood Marshall recusing himself due to his previous involvement in the case as Solicitor General, the court overturned Ali's conviction. The decision was based on a technical error by the Justice Department, rather than a broad endorsement of conscientious objection, but the result was the same. Muhammad Ali vindicated. He had been right to refuse induction. His religious beliefs were sincere, and the government had failed to properly respect those beliefs. The ruling came too late to restore the years that had been taken from him, but it cleared his name and opened the door for his return to boxing. The victory represented more than one man's vindication. It demonstrated that even in the midst of war, even when popular opinion ran overwhelmingly against dissent, the Constitution still protected individual conscience. Ali had refused to compromise, and ultimately, the system had to acknowledge that his refusal was righteous. For the anti-war movement, which by 1971 had grown to include millions of Americans from all backgrounds, Ali's Supreme Court victory felt like a confirmation that history would judge them favorably. For Black Americans who had watched him sacrifice everything rather than submit to injustice, the decision affirmed that resistance was not futile. The warrior's return. Even before the Supreme Court overturned his conviction, Ali had managed to secure a boxing license in Georgia, one of the few states where political influence and public opinion had shifted enough to allow his return. On October 26, 1970, after 3.5 years away from the ring, Muhammad Ali fought Jerry Quarry in Atlanta. The fight lasted 3 rounds before Quarry's cuts forced the referee to stop it, and Ali looked remarkably sharp considering his long layoff. He proved that the exile had not destroyed his skills, that the greatest fighter in the world was still inside the body that had been denied the right to compete. But the question remained, could he reclaim the championship? Joe Frazier now held the title that Ali had never lost in the ring, and Frazier was a devastating fighter in his own right. Shorter and stockier than Ali, Frazier fought with a relentless attacking style, bobbing and weaving under punches before unleashing hooks that could break bones and end fights. He had destroyed opponents with brutal efficiency, and when Ali challenged him for the title, the boxing world anticipated one of the greatest fights in history. March 8, 1971, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The fight of the century. 2 undefeated heavyweight champions, both at or near their peaks, meeting to settle the question of who was truly the greatest. The Madison Square Garden was packed with celebrities and politicians, with literary heavyweights like Norman Mailer covering the fight, with a closed-circuit television audience that paid unprecedented prices to watch the bout in theaters across America. The build-up had been intense, with Ali calling Frazier an Uncle Tom and the white man's champion, insults that wounded Frazier deeply and created a genuine animosity between the 2 men. The fight lived up to its billing. Ali started quickly, using his superior reach and hand speed to outbox Frazier in the early rounds. But Frazier kept coming forward, absorbing punishment to deliver punishment, his left hook finding its target again and again. By the middle rounds, the fight had become a brutal war of attrition, neither man willing to yield, both pouring everything they had into destroying the other. In the 11th round, Frazier's left hook knocked Ali's mouthpiece across the ring, a moment captured in photographs that showed the devastating power of Frazier's punching. In the 15th and final round, Frazier landed a left hook that sent Ali crashing to the canvas. Ali rose before the referee could count to 4, his legs unsteady but his will unbroken, and survived the round. When the judges' scorecards were tallied, Frazier had won a unanimous decision, handing Ali the first loss of his professional career. The defeat was crushing, not merely because Ali lost, but because it seemed to confirm what his critics had been saying for years. The exile had broken him, and he would never be the same fighter he had been before. Ali could have quit then. He was 29 years old, his health still intact, his legend secure. He had proven that he could compete at the highest level, even after 3.5 years away from the sport. He had made his political stand and paid the price for it. No one would have blamed him for retiring, to live off speaking fees and whatever other opportunities his fame could generate. But Ali was not built for retreat. He had called himself the greatest for so long that he had come to believe it with a certainty that defeat could not shake. If he was truly the greatest, then this loss was simply an obstacle to overcome, rather than a destination. He began the long climb back. Over the next 3 years, Ali fought regularly, defeating everyone put in front of him except Ken Norton, who broke Ali's jaw in a 1973 upset. Ali avenged that loss in a rematch later the same year, then defeated Joe Frazier in a rematch in January 1974, setting up the opportunity he had been chasing since the day his title was stripped, a chance to reclaim the heavyweight championship. George Foreman now held the title, having taken it from Frazier in a shockingly one-sided fight in Kingston, Jamaica, in January 1973. Foreman had destroyed Frazier in 2 rounds, knocking him down 6 times, making the man who had beaten Ali look helpless. Foreman was 25 years old, undefeated in 40 professional fights with 37 knockouts, and possessed a punching power that many observers considered the greatest in boxing history. His jab alone could knock men unconscious. His right hand seemed capable of breaking concrete. He was everything Ali was not: quiet, methodical, overwhelmingly powerful rather than elegantly quick. Sluggish, Don King, a former numbers runner from Cleveland who was trying to establish himself as a boxing promoter, conceived of a plan to stage the fight in Africa. He needed someone to finance the enormous purses that both fighters demanded, and he found his sponsor in Mobutu Sese Seko, the dictator of Zaire. Mobutu had seized power in a 1965 coup backed by Belgium and the United States, and now ruled his mineral-rich nation with an iron fist while siphoning millions into Swiss bank accounts. He saw the fight as an opportunity to showcase Zaire to the world, to position himself as a pan-African leader despite the corruption and brutality of his regime. Promised each fighter $5 million, the largest purse in boxing history at that time. He dubbed the fight the Rumble in the Jungle, though Ali would later claim that he came up with the phrase himself during training. The build-up included a 3-day music festival called Zaire 74, featuring performances by James Brown, B.B. King, Miriam Makeba, and other legendary artists, designed to celebrate the connection between African Americans and the African continent. The festival took place as scheduled in September 1974, but the fight itself delayed when Foreman suffered a cut above his eye during sparring, requiring 11 stitches and pushing the bout back 5 weeks to October 30th. Ali and Foreman spent the summer of 1974 training in Zaire, acclimating to the tropical heat and humidity. Ali took to the country immediately, charming the Congolese people with his energy and accessibility. He would jog through the streets of Kinshasa, trailed by crowds of people chanting, "Ali, Bomaye," which meant, "Ali, kill him," in Lingala. He visited villages, held impromptu press conferences, and generally behaved like a man who felt more at home in Africa than he ever had in America. The Congolese people embraced him as one of their own, seeing in him a symbol of African pride and achievement. Foreman, by contrast, remained isolated in his compound, training behind closed walls with his German shepherd dogs. The Congolese saw the dogs as symbols of colonial oppression, as Belgian authorities had used similar dogs to terrorize the population during the brutal colonial period. Foreman's aloofness and his choice of companions made him the villain in a story where Ali was clearly the hero. By the time the fight finally arrived, the entire country was united behind Ali, even though he was a massive underdog, according to the bookmakers and boxing experts. Mosques. October 30th, 1974, at 4 a.m. local time in the Stade du 20 Mai in Kinshasa, 60,000 spectators filled the arena to watch Muhammad Ali face George Foreman for the heavyweight championship of the world. The early morning start time was designed to accommodate American television audiences, allowing the fight to be broadcast in prime time on the East Coast. Ali entered the ring as a 4-1 underdog, with virtually every expert predicting that Foreman's power would overwhelm Ali's speed and skill. Many feared for Ali's safety, worried that the 32-year-old former champion might be seriously injured by the younger, stronger, more devastating puncher. From the opening bell, Ali shocked everyone by abandoning the strategy he had advertised throughout training camp. He had told the press that he would dance around Foreman, using his footwork to stay out of range while picking the champion apart with jabs and combinations. Instead, Ali came out aggressively, throwing big right-hand leads that connected with Foreman's face, backing the champion up and establishing that he was not afraid. Then, in the second round, Ali retreated to the ropes and invited Foreman to hit him. What became known as the rope-a-dope strategy involved Ali leaning back on the loose ring ropes, which absorbed much of the impact from Foreman's punches, while covering up and allowing the champion to exhaust himself, throwing power shots that mostly hit Ali's arms and gloves. Between rounds, Ali's trainer Angelo Dundee screamed at him to get off the ropes, terrified that Foreman would eventually land a knockout blow. But Ali understood something that Dundee and everyone else missed. Foreman's power came from his intimidation as much as his physical strength, and if Ali could take his best punches without falling, the psychological advantage would shift. Foreground after round, Foreman threw thunderous combinations while Ali defended, countered with quick shots, and talked constantly, telling the champion he punched like a girl, that he was getting tired, that he had nothing left. Foreman later recalled that Ali's words were as demoralizing as anything that happened physically in the fight. In the 8th round, as Foreman's arms grew heavy from throwing hundreds of punches, Ali saw his opportunity. He came off the ropes with a combination of punches that culminated in a hard right hand that sent Foreman stumbling. A follow-up left hook put the champion on the canvas. Fans stretched a rise before the count of 10, but his legs would not obey his will. The referee counted him out, and Muhammad Ali was once again the heavyweight champion of the world. The stadium exploded in celebration, with fans, officials, and paratroops flooding the ring in jubilation. Ali had accomplished what seemed impossible, defeating a champion whom many considered unbeatable, reclaiming the title that had been stripped from him 7 years earlier, proving that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The victory was more than an athletic achievement. It represented a kind of redemption for the 1960s, a decade that had begun with hope and ended with assassinations, riots, and disillusionment. Muhammad Ali had refused to fight in Vietnam, had stood against the government at the height of the war's popularity, and had been vindicated both in court and in the court of public opinion. His comeback symbolized the possibility that principles could prevail over power, that resistance could lead to ultimate victory. Just weeks earlier, President Richard Nixon had resigned in disgrace over the Watergate scandal, and now Ali stood as world champion again, a moral victor in a nation that was slowly reckoning with its own sins. The fight was watched by an estimated 1 billion people worldwide, approximately 1/4 of the Earth's population in 1974. It generated over $100 million from closed-circuit television and broadcasting rights, an unprecedented sum that demonstrated Ali's global appeal. He had become more than a boxer or even a political figure. He was a symbol of resistance, excellence, and the triumph of will over circumstance, recognized and celebrated in every corner of the planet. The price of glory. Precarious. After reclaiming the championship, Ali settled into a period of dominance that would last nearly 4 years. He defended his title successfully against Chuck Wepner, Ron Lyle, and Joe Bugner, solid fighters who provided little real challenge. But in October 1975, he agreed to fight Joe Frazier for a third time, in a bout that would become known as the Thriller in Manila. The fight was scheduled to take place in the Philippines, with President Ferdinand Marcos and the Philippine government providing financial backing in hopes of generating positive publicity for the country. The relationship between Ali and Frazier had deteriorated significantly since their first meeting. Ali's insults during the build-up to their fights, particularly his characterization of Frazier as an Uncle Tom and a gorilla, had wounded Frazier deeply. Frazier came from genuine poverty in South Carolina, had worked in slaughterhouses as a young man, and had fought his way to the championship through sheer determination and toughness. Ali's suggestion that he was somehow less authentically black than Ali, that he served white interests rather than black liberation, was both unfair and cruel. Frazier had supported Ali during his exile, even lending him money when the former champion was struggling financially, and Ali's public mockery felt like a betrayal of that generosity. Lyons continued his psychological warfare in the build-up to the Manila fight. He punched a rubber gorilla at press conferences while chanting his rhyme about getting the gorilla in Manila, making sure that everyone understood the racial subtext of his insults. He knew that making Frazier angry would make him reckless, that an emotional fighter makes mistakes, and that exploiting those mistakes was the path to victory. But the cruelty of the taunts revealed something troubling about Ali's character, a willingness to wound someone deeply in service of his own purposes, a streak of meanness that contradicted the image of moral superiority he cultivated. Defense took place on October 1, 1975, at the Araneta Coliseum in Quezon City, part of Metro Manila. Despite the early morning time, the arena was filled with enthusiastic fans. The temperature inside exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity was suffocating. Both fighters understood that this would be a war rather than a boxing match, that the heat would make it a test of will as much as skill. They had fought a total of 24 rounds against each other in their previous 2 fights, and both men knew exactly what to expect. From the opening bell, Ali attacked with an aggression that surprised everyone who had watched him rely on the rope-a-dope against Foreman. He wanted to establish dominance early, to break Frazier's will before the heat could break his own body. He landed clean combinations that snapped Frazier's head back, winning the first 3 rounds decisively. But Frazier, true to his nature, kept coming forward, absorbing punishment to deliver his own brutal body shots and hooks. By the middle rounds, Frazier had taken control, hammering Ali with left hooks that would have stopped lesser men. Ali later said that he thought about quitting during those middle rounds, that he was so exhausted and hurt that he considered not answering the bell. But he found something inside himself, some reserve of pride or stubbornness or championship will that allowed him to keep fighting. In the 10th round, he began landing combinations that swelled Frazier's eyes nearly shut. Frazier could barely see, but he would not stop throwing punches, would not stop moving forward, would not give Ali the satisfaction of surrender. By the 14th round, both men were operating on pure will. Frazier's face was grotesquely swollen, his eyes reduced to slits through which he could barely perceive shapes and light. Ali's body was covered with welts from Frazier's body punches, his legs cramping, his arms so heavy that lifting them required conscious effort. In the corner after the 14th round, Ali told his trainer Angelo Dundee to cut his gloves off because he could not continue. Dundee ignored him, knowing that champions sometimes ask to quit when they are actually ahead and simply need encouragement to finish. In Frazier's corner, trainer Eddie Filliam still to fellow the groups of the moved up. Instead, which was in the next with a lowly bods that had been later, from opponing to the floor and gently lair that he could not despit. In corner, trainer Eddie Futch made a different decision. He could see that Frazier could not see, that continuing would be reckless and dangerous, that his fighter had proven everything that needed proving. When Futch told Frazier to sit down and that the fight was over, Frazier protested, insisting that he wanted to continue. But Futch refused to let him go out for the 15th round, waving the towel to signal that Ali had won by technical knockout. Ali collapsed on his stool when he learned that the fight was over. He had won, but at what cost? He later described the thriller in Manila as the closest thing to dying that he had ever experienced. In the immediate aftermath, he praised Frazier as the greatest fighter next to himself, acknowledging the extraordinary courage both men had shown. But the damage done that night, the hundreds of punches absorbed by both fighters, would contribute to the neurological problems both men experienced in later life. Ali defended his title twice more in 1976, but the signs of decline were becoming apparent. His reflexes, once so quick that he could make opponents miss with ease, were slowing. His legs, which had carried him around the ring with the grace of a dancer, were getting heavy. He was fighting more on courage and experience than on the physical gifts that had made him seem invincible. In February 1978, he faced Leon Spinks, a young fighter with only 7 professional fights, but tremendous natural ability. Spinks outworked Ali over 15 rounds, winning a split decision and taking Ali's championship. The loss shocked the boxing world. How could the greatest fighter of all time lose to someone so inexperienced? But those who knew boxing understood that Ali was 36 years old and had been fighting since he was 12. His body had absorbed thousands of rounds of punishment in the gym and the ring. The exile had robbed him of prime years when he could have fought less often and preserved himself better. Instead, he had fought everyone and anyone, taking unnecessary risks because he believed he was invincible, and because the Nation of Islam's financial management of his career meant he needed to keep fighting to maintain his lifestyle. In September 1978, Ali was the first we from Demon letter on the middle community which was felt women from ground. Fought Spinks in a rematch at the Superdome in New Orleans. He trained more seriously than he had for their first fight, losing weight and regaining some of the speed that had made him great. He won a unanimous decision, becoming the first heavyweight in history to win the World Championship 3 times. The achievement was historic, but those close to him worried that he was fighting beyond his time, that continuing to box would damage his health irreversibly. Ali retired in 1979, announcing that he would leave boxing while still on top. But retirement proved difficult for a man whose entire identity had been built around fighting. In 1980, at age 38, he agreed to fight Larry Holmes, who had been Ali's sparring partner years earlier and now held the WBC heavyweight championship. The fight was scheduled for October 2, 1980, in Las Vegas, and everyone except Ali seemed to know that it was a terrible idea. The Larry Holmes fight was a disaster. Ali looked old and slow, unable to avoid Holmes's punches or mount any sustained offense. Holmes, who loved and respected Ali, later said that hitting him felt like beating up his own father. After 10 one-sided rounds, Ali's trainer, Angelo Dundee, stopped the fight, sparing Ali further punishment. It was the first time Ali had been stopped in his career, and the sight of his hero being beaten so thoroughly devastated millions of fans worldwide. Ali should have retired permanently after the Holmes fight, but financial pressures and perhaps an inability to accept that his body could no longer do what his will demanded led him to fight one more time. On December 11, 1981, in Nassau, Bahamas, he faced Trevor Berbick in a fight that was painful to watch. Ali moved like a man in slow motion, his once beautiful footwork reduced to flat-footed plodding. Berbick won a clear decision, and this time Ali accepted that his boxing career was truly over. He was 39 years old, and he had been fighting professionally for 21 years. Stood at 56 wins and 5 losses, with 37 knockouts. The statistics captured his excellence, but could not convey his importance, the way he had transformed boxing from a sport into a cultural force, the manner in which he had used his platform to challenge injustice. Over the course of his career, Ali had absorbed an estimated 200,000 hits to the head, an accumulation of trauma that would have consequences that became clear in the years to come. The longest fight. Deek. In November 1982, Ali returned to the gym to train for a 3-week exhibition tour with planned stops in Saudi Arabia, India, and Pakistan. The physical activity revealed what friends and family had been noticing for some time. His health was deteriorating in ways that went beyond normal aging. His speech had become slightly slurred, his movements less fluid, his hands sometimes trembling at rest. In 1984, after checking himself into Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City, Muhammad Ali received a diagnosis that would define the rest of his life: Parkinson's syndrome. Glazed. The diagnosis came when Ali was only 42 years old, significantly younger than the typical age of onset for Parkinson's disease. The doctors who examined him initially described his condition as Parkinsonism rather than full Parkinson's disease, suggesting that his symptoms might be controllable with medication and might not progress with the severity of classic Parkinson's. But as years passed, it became clear that Ali's condition was indeed idiopathic Parkinson's disease, a chronic and progressive neurological disorder that affects movement and cannot be cured. The question of whether boxing caused Ali's Parkinson's disease has been debated by medical experts for decades. Ali himself and his physicians consistently argued that his Parkinson's was unrelated to the head trauma he sustained during his boxing career. They pointed to the fact that his symptoms began relatively early and followed a pattern consistent with young-onset idiopathic Parkinson's disease rather than the post-traumatic syndrome that results from repeated concussions. They noted that he had a family history of Parkinson's, with both an uncle and grandfather suffering from the condition, suggesting a genetic component. However, research conducted after Ali's death, including studies of his speech patterns throughout his career, revealed evidence that neurological changes were occurring years before his official diagnosis. Analysis showed that his speech slowed significantly after particularly brutal fights, particularly his 15-round war with Ernie Shavers in 1977, during which Shavers landed 266 punches. While Ali's speech would normalize between fights, the overall trend showed a gradual decline in verbal processing speed during the final years of his career. Head trauma is now recognized as a risk factor for later development of Parkinson's disease, though it cannot be definitively proven that boxing caused Ali's condition rather than simply accelerating an inevitable decline. Ali's public response to the diagnosis was characteristically defiant. In a 1984 interview shortly after the announcement, he said that God had given him this illness as a test, and that he would face it the same way he had faced every other challenge in his life, with courage and faith. He refused to see himself as a victim or to waste time feeling sorry for himself. Instead, focused on what he could still do, rather than what the disease was taking from him. He continued to make public appearances, traveled extensively, and dedicated himself to humanitarian work that gave his life meaning beyond boxing. Kennedy. In 1986, Ali married Yolanda Williams, whom he had known since she was 6 years old, when her family moved to Louisville in 1963. Lonnie, as everyone called her, became not just his wife, but his primary caregiver and the guardian of his legacy. She managed his increasingly complicated medical needs, protected him from people who would exploit his generosity and fame, and worked tirelessly to ensure that his final decades would be marked by dignity rather than decline. Together they adopted a son, Asad Amin, and established a life in Arizona that balanced privacy with continued public engagement. In 1997, Ali and Lonnie, along with Phoenix philanthropist Jimmy Walker and Dr. Abraham Lieberman, established the Muhammad Ali Parkinson Center at Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix. The center would grow to become one of the most comprehensive Parkinson's disease treatment and research facilities in the world, providing care to thousands of patients while advancing scientific understanding of the disease. Ali's willingness to be public about his condition helped reduce stigma and encouraged others to seek treatment rather than hiding their symptoms in shame. The death of Elijah Muhammad in 1975, the Nation of Islam split into two factions. Wallace D. Muhammad, Elijah's son, led the organization toward mainstream Sunni Islam, rejecting the racial mythology and separatist theology that his father had preached. Louis Farrakhan, who had played a role in the campaign against Malcolm X, established a new organization that retained the old nation's teachings. Ali sided with Wallace Muhammad, embracing a more orthodox understanding of Islam that saw people of all races as equal before God. In interviews during the 1990s, Ali explicitly rejected the racial teachings he had once accepted, saying that hearts and souls have no color, and acknowledging that Elijah Muhammad had been wrong to talk about white devils. In 2005, Ali adopted the last with the dominers that was seem his world and had formant that lightly moved. In 2005, Ali rather than down-spetting follow of the interim to what the moved by thinking about there. In 2005, Ali adopted that Muhammad Hamanage had adopted in the world. In 1995, Ali adopted the official being at the game with the future. Attracted to its emphasis on spirituality, peace, and the unity of all creation. The transformation from the angry young convert who had preached black nationalism to the universalist elder who saw all humanity as one reflected genuine spiritual growth rather than political calculation. He had evolved as a thinker and a believer, allowing experience and reflection to modify views that he once held with absolute certainty. This willingness to change, to admit error, to grow beyond his younger self, demonstrated a kind of courage different from, but equal to, the courage he had shown in the ring. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Ali remained active despite his worsening condition. He traveled to Afghanistan in 2002 as a United Nations messenger of peace, visiting Kabul for a 3-day goodwill mission. He visited Ireland in 2009 to see the home of his great-grandfather, Abe Grady, who had emigrated to the United States in the 1860s. He continued to make appearances at charity events and political functions, his presence alone capable of generating millions of dollars for causes ranging from Parkinson's research to international peace efforts. Characterization, because the most memorable public appearance of Ali's later life came on July 19, 1996, during the opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. The identity of the person who would light the Olympic cauldron had been kept secret, with even most Olympic officials unaware of the choice. When swimmer Janet Evans passed the torch to Muhammad Ali, the world gasped. Ali stood before 3 billion television viewers, his hands trembling from Parkinson's, holding the Olympic torch aloft. For what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only moments, he stood there as the mechanism to light the cauldron moved slowly into position, the flames from the torch flaring back at him, his arms shaking from the effort of holding it steady. When the flame finally traveled up to light the massive cauldron, the stadium erupted in a roar that seemed to shake the earth. People were crying, even those who had once despised Ali, moved by the courage of a man refusing to hide his illness, using his final moment of Olympic glory to inspire millions who suffered from diseases and disabilities. It was a moment of national reconciliation, America finally acknowledging that the young man who refused to go to Vietnam had been right, that his sacrifice had been noble rather than cowardly, that his courage in the ring was matched by his courage in standing for principle. Former President Bill Clinton later said that he wept while watching Ali take those final steps to light the cauldron, that the image represented everything America could be when it lived up to its ideals. Janet Evans, who had passed the torch to Ali, said she would give up all 5 of her Olympic gold medals to experience that moment just one more time. Evander Holyfield, who had been the original choice to light the cauldron before NBC executive Dick Ebersol successfully argued for Ali, wrote that when he saw Ali emerge on stage with his arms shaking and his body fighting against Parkinson's, he immediately thought that they had chosen the right man, and he would not have had it any other way. In 2012, Ali had never state in the first chases will and only formally to express into services that not fully trigestive. In 2012, Ali was not enjoyed before the cauldron, the local instant for the life that wert in the first part. In 2012, Ali would not advent it with a little bitness. They completely dispersed with something the London Games, where he was one of 8 people chosen to carry the Olympic flag during the opening ceremony. He was helped to his feet by his wife, Lonnie, his Parkinson's having progressed to the point where standing and walking required assistance. But he was there, present at one more Olympic Games, a living reminder that athletic excellence means nothing without moral courage. The Parkinson's progressively robbed Ali of the physical abilities that had defined himself, his life. His speech became increasingly difficult to understand, the volume of his voice dropping to a whisper. His famous, shuffling footwork, the dance that had made him the most beautiful fighter in boxing history, gave way to the shuffling gait of advanced Parkinson's. His hands, which had been faster than the eye could follow, trembled at rest and required conscious effort to control. But those who knew him insisted that his mind remained sharp, that behind the physical limitations was the same quick wit and mischievous sense of humor that had entertained the world for decades. A few years before his death, Ali underwent surgery for spinal stenosis, a condition that causes narrowing of the spine and created additional mobility problems. In early 2015, he was hospitalized for pneumonia and a severe urinary tract infection. The illnesses marked a turning point in his decline, his body finally succumbing to the accumulation of decades of punishment and disease. He spent more time at home in Arizona, making fewer public appearances, his care becoming increasingly complex as multiple medical conditions converged. The final bell. On June 3, 2016, Muhammad Ali died at a hospital in Scottsdale, Arizona, at the age of 74. He had been admitted the day before with respiratory complications, his body finally unable to continue the fight against Parkinson's disease and the various conditions that had weakened him over his final years. Lonnie Ali was with him at the end, as she had been with him through all the difficult years of his decline, ensuring that his death came with the same dignity that had marked his later life. The news of his passing spread around the world within minutes, triggering an outpouring of grief and remembrance that transcended sports, nationality, and religion. Heads of state, athletes, artists, activists, and ordinary people who had never met him expressed sorrow at his death and gratitude for his life. President Barack Obama ordered flags flown at half-staff and issued a statement calling Ali a man who fought for what was right, who embodied the ideals of courage and conviction. Former President George W. Bush, who had awarded Ali the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2005, called him a fighter for the ages. The reaction demonstrated that Ali had achieved in death what few people achieve in life: nearly universal recognition as a force for good in the world. In the city of Ali's birth, the response was particularly profound. The Muhammad Ali Center announced that it would remain open throughout the memorial period, waiving admission fees to allow anyone who wished to pay respects. Within hours, a makeshift memorial had grown outside the center, with flowers, photographs, boxing gloves, and handwritten notes, creating a shrine to the fallen champion. The line to enter the center stretched for blocks, with people waiting hours in the June heat for the chance to walk through exhibits celebrating Ali's life and to sign books of condolence that would be given to the family. For 8 days following Ali's death, Louisville authorities reported 0 violent crimes in the city, a remarkable statistic in a community that had been experiencing a surge in violence. It was as if the city came together in shared grief and decided to honor Ali's memory by embodying the peace and unity he had come to represent. The Muhammad Ali Center's staff spoke of Muhammad magic, the phenomenon of seemingly miraculous interventions that occurred when the center faced challenges. And this week of peace felt like one final manifestation of that magic. Years before his death, Ali had planned his own memorial services with meticulous attention to detail. He wanted the events to be inclusive, to give as many people as possible the opportunity to pay their respects, to serve as a teaching moment about faith, courage, and the fight for justice. The result was a 3-day series of events that transformed Louisville into a pilgrimage site for mourners from around the world. The first major event was a traditional Muslim Janazah prayer service held on June 9, 2016, at Freedom Hall, the same venue where Ali had fought his first professional bout 55 years earlier. More than 14,000 people attended the service, which lasted only a few minutes according to Muslim custom. Worshippers stood in rows as they recited prayers, following the guidance of Imam Zaid Shakir, who explained that Ali had wanted his memorial to educate people about Islam at a time when Muslims faced increasing prejudice and suspicion. Muslim organizations and mosques around the world participated by saying special prayers for Ali during that week, a global observance that demonstrated his significance to the worldwide Muslim community. On June 10, 2016, had Olympt with 14,000, for the future that reserved the blessed floor than Ludlim 2016. On June 10, 2016, that reserved his prayer, a claips the June sect. On the June 1st, 2016, that women concerned with in search with Ali and on the 1st of Kaliga of 23rd. On June 10, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice at according to Muslims of each 1990 lef, on June 10, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice, according to Muslim community of the Khamenei. On June 10, 2016, his Wislam to the first of them of June 16 more, on June 10, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice. On the 10th, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice, according to Muslim community of the Khamenei. On the June 10, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice, at according to Muslim community of the Khamenei. On June 10, 2016, that reserved his character and Muslim, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice, according to Muslim community of the Khamenei. On June 10, 2016, that reserved his firstovly with a first special prejudice, at according to Muslim community of the Khamenei. On the 2016, that reserved his prayers for Ali, who spent to raid a bit 40,000 people. The Muslim Grames women a regent separated, which continue to the universal, the global observance that demonstrated his significance to the worldwide Muslim custom. 2016. A funeral procession carried Ali's body through Louisville on a route that covered more than 20 miles and touched every important location in his life. The procession began at the A.D. Porter and Sons funeral home, the same funeral home that had buried Ali's parents. Ali's cherry-red casket, draped in an Islamic shroud, was placed in a black 2016 Cadillac XTS hearse, modified specifically for the occasion. The route took the procession down Muhammad Ali Boulevard, past the Muhammad Ali Center, through the Beecher Terrace housing complex, past Central High School, past the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage, and crucially, past 3302 Grand Avenue, Ali's childhood home. Ends of thousands of people lined the streets, many having waited for hours to secure good viewing spots. They threw roses onto the hearse, red and yellow and white flowers covering the windshield so completely that the driver had to use the wipers periodically to see the road. They chanted, "Ali, Ali, Ali," as the procession passed, some crying, some laughing, all united in their love for a man who had represented different things to different people, but who meant something profound to everyone. The scene was extraordinary, reminiscent of the state funerals given to presidents and kings, a recognition that athletic and moral greatness deserved to be honored with the same ceremony as political power. The memorial service at the KFC Yum Center began at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an hour after it was originally scheduled, delayed by the overwhelming number of people who came to pay their respects. The arena holds approximately 20,000 people, and every seat was filled, with many more watching on giant screens outside the venue. The service was open to the public, with free tickets distributed on a first-come, first-served basis, ensuring that people of all economic backgrounds could attend. The result was an audience that perfectly reflected Ali's universality. Rich and poor, black and white, Muslim and Christian and Jewish and atheist, sitting together to celebrate a life that had touched all of them. The list of speakers read like a catalogue of American cultural and political significance. Billy Crystal, the comedian and actor who had befriended Ali decades earlier, delivered a eulogy that mixed humor and heartbreak, recalling Ali's wit and warmth, while acknowledging the pain of watching Parkinson's slowly steal his voice. Bryant Gumbel spoke of Ali's transformation from the most hated athlete in America to the most beloved, a journey that required tremendous courage and an unwavering commitment to principle. Former President Bill Clinton gave a eulogy that situated Ali within the broader context of American history, arguing that his refusal to go to Vietnam represented a moral clarity that eventually pulled the entire nation toward a more honest reckoning with justice. Atala Shabazz, the eldest daughter of Malcolm X, spoke with a generosity that acknowledged the pain of Ali's rejection of her father, while recognizing that Ali had been a young man caught in forces beyond his control. Her presence honored both her father's memory and Ali's later regret, offering a kind of reconciliation that the two men had never achieved in life. Senator Orrin Hatch, a conservative Republican from Utah who had formed an unlikely friendship with Ali, demonstrated that the champion's appeal transcended political ideology, that his basic humanity connected with people regardless of their policy positions. Rabbi Michael Lerner delivered a eulogy that challenged the audience to honor Ali not through words, but through action, insisting that the best way to respect his memory was to speak out against injustice and refuse to follow the path of conformity. He specifically called out ongoing violence in various parts of the world, a politically charged move that some found inappropriate, but that captured Ali's own willingness to use his platform for controversial causes. Lonnie Ali, his widow and the guardian of his legacy, spoke with quiet dignity about her husband's wishes that his life and death serve as teaching moments, reminding people that he had seen the face of injustice and had refused to be defeated by it. Ali's daughters, Mariam and Rashida, spoke of their father's love and humanity, the private man behind the public legend, the devoted father who was present in their lives despite the demands of fame. Will Smith, who had portrayed Ali in a 2001 biographical film, served as one of the pallbearers, along with former heavyweight champions Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson. The presence of these fighters, representing different eras of boxing history, demonstrated Ali's lasting influence on the sport he had transformed. After the memorial service, Ali's body was transported to Cave Hill Cemetery for a private burial. Cave Hill is Louisville's oldest cemetery, established in 1848, a pastoral landscape of rolling hills and ancient trees where many of Louisville's most prominent citizens have been laid to rest. Ali was buried in a simple grave, marked by a headstone bearing one of his most famous quotes: "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." The words captured the philosophy that had guided his later life, the understanding that fame and achievement meant nothing without a commitment to helping those in need. In the months and years following his death, she was stirred police the right to Louisville Muhammad Ali International Airport was renamed in his honor in 2019, ensuring that every visitor to the city would be greeted by his name. The Muhammad Ali Center expanded its programming to serve as a continuing resource for teaching about his life and the values he represented. Documentaries and books continued to examine his legacy from new angles, each generation finding fresh insights in his story. The Eternal Champion. Muhammad Ali was more than a boxer, more even than an activist or humanitarian. He was a living symbol of the possibility of transformation, both personal and societal. He began his public life as Cassius Clay, a brash young fighter from Louisville who talked too much and promised too much, annoying as many people as he entertained. He became Muhammad Ali, a champion who refused to compromise his principles even when compromise would have been easier and more profitable. He ended his life as a universal symbol of courage, someone whom people of all backgrounds could admire even if they had once despised him. The transformation was not smooth or simple. Ali made mistakes, said things he later regretted, hurt people he loved, allowed himself to be manipulated by those who saw him as a tool rather than a person. His treatment of Malcolm X stands as a permanent stain on his legacy, a moment of weakness when he chose institutional loyalty over personal loyalty, when he allowed others to poison his mind against the man who had been most instrumental in shaping his consciousness. His cruel taunting of Joe Frazier, calling him a gorilla and an Uncle Tom, wounded a good man who had supported him during his exile and deserved better treatment. But Ali's willingness to acknowledge his errors, to grow and change throughout his life, demonstrated a moral courage that matched his physical bravery. He eventually rejected the racial theology of the Nation of Islam, admitting that Elijah Muhammad had been wrong to preach hatred of white people. He expressed regret about his treatment of Malcolm X, acknowledging that his mentor had been right to challenge corruption and hypocrisy. He built relationships with people of all backgrounds, understanding that humanity transcends race, religion, and nationality. His stand against the Vietnam War represents his most significant contribution to American history. In 1967, when he refused induction into the armed forces, public opinion overwhelmingly supported the war and condemned those who resisted it. The cost of his resistance was enormous. His championship was stripped, his boxing license was suspended, he faced 5 years in prison, he lost the prime earning years of his athletic life. But he stood firm, accepting poverty and obscurity rather than violating what he believed to be right. His sacrifice helped legitimize the anti-war movement, showing that opposition to the war was not limited to hippies and radicals, but included patriots who loved their country enough to challenge its mistakes. History vindicated his position. The Vietnam War ended in defeat and disillusionment, with most Americans eventually concluding that the war had been a tragic mistake that cost 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese lives, while accomplishing nothing of strategic value. Ali's refusal to participate in that tragedy, his willingness to sacrifice everything rather than be complicit in it, stands as a model of moral courage that subsequent generations have studied and admired. Young people today who learn about the Vietnam War cannot understand how anyone thought the war was justified, and Ali's contemporaneous opposition proves that some people could see through the propaganda, even when it was most powerful. His impact on the civil rights movement and black consciousness was equally profound. Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of non-violence and integration achieved remarkable legislative victories, but many young black Americans found the constant demands for patience and suffering degrading. They wanted to see black people assert themselves with confidence and power, rather than appealing to white consciences that seemed unmoved by moral arguments. Ali provided an alternative model of black masculinity, one that did not seek white approval and did not measure success by white standards. He declared himself beautiful when the world called him ugly, declared himself great when the world called him arrogant, insisted on his own names and his own terms, rather than accepting what others wanted to call him. Black Power movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s drew inspiration from Ali's example, understanding that true liberation required psychological transformation as much as legal reform. The slogan, "Black is beautiful," echoed Ali's constant self-affirmation. The raised fists at the 1968 Olympics gestured toward the defiance Ali had embodied. The transformation of Cassius Clay into Muhammad Ali inspired countless other Black Americans to reject slave names, to embrace Islam or Pan-Africanism, to see themselves as part of a global struggle against colonialism and racism. For the broader Islamic world, Ali's prominence helped humanize Muslims at a time when American media portrayed Islam as exotic and dangerous. He showed that Muslims could be Americans, that Islam was compatible with Western values when those values were properly understood, that religious conviction could coexist with engagement in secular society. His practice of Islam evolved over his lifetime, from the heterodox teachings of the Nation of Islam to the orthodox Sunni practice he embraced in his later years. But his commitment to the faith never wavered. He prayed 5 times daily, made the pilgrimage to Mecca multiple times, studied the Quran seriously, and tried to embody Islamic principles of charity, humility, and justice. 2 years he lived with Parkinson's disease provided him with an opportunity to demonstrate a different kind of courage. The man who had floated like a butterfly now shuffled slowly, his movements constrained by neurological damage. The man who had verbally demolished opponents with rapid-fire wit now spoke in whispers that required patient listening to understand. The man who had been the most beautiful athlete in the world now presented a body ravaged by disease. But he refused to hide, refused to withdraw from public life, refused to let Parkinson's define him. He continued to travel, to make appearances, to support causes he believed in, showing millions of people that disability does not destroy dignity. Kennedy, his 1996 appearance at the Atlanta Olympics, became one of the most powerful moments in Olympic history, precisely because it showcased his vulnerability alongside his strength. The trembling hands holding the torch, the visible effort required to stand and perform this simple task, reminded everyone watching that courage is not the absence of fear or difficulty, but the determination to act despite them. For people suffering from Parkinson's disease and other debilitating conditions, Ali's willingness to appear in public with his symptoms visible provided enormous encouragement, demonstrating that life continues even when bodies fail. The Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville stands as a permanent monument to his legacy, but it is a monument with a purpose beyond mere commemoration. The center's exhibits use Ali's life as a framework for teaching about courage, conviction, respect, and social responsibility. It asks visitors to consider their own potential to make a difference in the world, to think about the principles they would be willing to sacrifice for, to examine their own prejudices and assumptions. The center's goal is not to turn everyone into boxers or even into activists, but to inspire people to be the best versions of themselves, to live with integrity and purpose. Ali's impact on boxing itself cannot be overstated. Before Ali, heavyweight champions were expected to be plodding power punchers who relied on intimidation and strength. Ali transformed the heavyweight division into a showcase for speed, skill, and tactical brilliance. He proved that a light heavyweight's body with superior reflexes could dominate larger, stronger men. He turned boxing into performance art, his style so beautiful that people who hated violence loved watching him fight. The current generation of heavyweight boxers, all of them more athletic and mobile than the champions of the 1950s and early 1960s, owe their approach to Ali's revolutionary example. His influence extended beyond sports into entertainment and popular culture. His poetry and trash talk established the template that hip-hop artists would follow decades later. The combination of boasting and social commentary that defines rap music. His willingness to speak his mind without regard for consequences inspired comedians and entertainers to take risks with their own material. His understanding that athletic excellence alone was insufficient, that champions had responsibilities beyond their sport, established a model that athletes from every generation since have tried to emulate. When we measure Ali's significance, we must consider it with what boxes is become to the place on fact of you. When we measure Ali's know to be trulier to believe, we must decome to them place, but following exploring with such as like. When we measure Ali's significant, we must becoming ablaze. When we measure Ali's significant, we must becoming ablaze, but following the company. When we measure Ali's significant, not just what he accomplished, but what he represented. He was living proof that individuals can make a difference, that standing for principle matters, even when the cost is high, that transformation is possible for both people and societies. He showed that being the greatest required more than winning fights, that true greatness emerged from the willingness to sacrifice for what is right. He demonstrated that courage comes in many forms, from facing opponents in the ring to facing governments in court to facing illness with dignity. The world that mourned his passing in 2016 was profoundly different from the world into which he was born in 1942. Segregation had been outlawed, though racism persisted in more subtle forms. The Vietnam War had been over for 4 decades, though America continued to struggle with questions about when and how to use military force. The Nation of Islam had evolved or splintered, though black nationalism remained an important current in African American political thought. And Muhammad Ali had transformed from the most hated athlete in America to arguably the most beloved person on earth. That transformation reflected not just Ali's evolution, but America's slow journey toward recognizing that those who challenge injustice deserve honor rather than condemnation. It took decades, but eventually the nation understood that the young man who refused to go to Vietnam had been right, that his sacrifice had been noble, that his courage had helped end a war that never should have been fought. The reconciliation was never complete, as Ali's opponents never entirely forgave him, and segments of American society continued to view him with suspicion. But the dominant narrative shifted from villain to hero. Muhammad Ali's legacy is measured not in championship belts or Olympic medals, but in the millions of lives he inspired and the conversations he started that continue to this day. Every athlete who uses their platform to speak about social justice follows the path Ali opened. Every person who refuses to compromise their principles when compromise would be easier draws strength from Ali's example. Every individual fighting against illness or disability while maintaining their dignity embodies the courage Ali displayed in his final decades. On his gravestone in Cave Hill Cemetery, the quote about service being the rent we pay for our room here on earth captures the philosophy that guided his later life. But perhaps a better summary comes from his own words, spoken during his prime. I am America. I am the part you won't recognize, but get used to me. Black, confident, cocky. My name, not yours. My religion, not yours. My goals, my own. Get used to me. Those words, controversial when he spoke them in the 1960s, have become prophetic. America did get used to him, did recognize him, did eventually celebrate him as one of its greatest citizens. His bicycle stolen in Louisville in 1954 could not have imagined the journey that lay ahead of him. He wanted to find whoever took his bike and whip them. Instead, he found boxing, found greatness, found purpose, found a platform from which he could challenge the most powerful forces in the world. He became Muhammad Ali, the greatest, the people's champion, a symbol of courage and conviction that will inspire generations yet unborn. The fight was won or lost far away from witnesses, behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road, long before he danced under those lights. The same was true of his moral battles. The victory was achieved in the moments when he could have compromised but chose principle, when he could have taken the easier path but stood firm, when he could have remained silent but spoke truth to power. Those private moments of decision, multiplied across a lifetime, created the legend that the world mourns and celebrates. Muhammad Ali is gone, but everything he stood for remains. The courage to face impossible odds, the conviction to sacrifice comfort for principle, the confidence to declare your own greatness and then prove it, the humility to acknowledge mistakes and grow beyond them, the compassion to use fame for the benefit of others, the faith to believe that justice will eventually prevail, even when the present moment offers little evidence. His story is America's story, a narrative of struggle and redemption, of finding greatness through suffering, of learning that true courage requires more than physical bravery. It is humanity's story, a testament to the potential that exists within every person to rise above circumstances and transform not just themselves, but the world around them. He was the greatest, not just because he could float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, but because he understood that being great required using whatever gifts you possess in service of something larger than yourself. Olympic flame that he lit with trembling hands in Atlanta will burn forever in our collective memory, a symbol of the human spirit refusing to be extinguished by illness or age or oppression. The championship belts he won and won again represent more than athletic achievement. They stand for the possibility of redemption, the promise that setbacks are not endings, but opportunities for greater victories. The name Muhammad Ali, which he chose for himself despite the world's resistance, echoes across continents and generations, a reminder that we all have the right and the responsibility to define ourselves. Louisville's West End produced a champion, but that champion belonged to the world. The lessons he taught transcend geography, culture, religion, and time. He showed us how to fight, not just with fists, but with words and principles, and unwavering commitment to justice. He showed us how to win with grace and lose with dignity. He showed us how to transform pain into purpose and suffering into strength. He showed us that the fight is not over until the final bell rings, and even then, the legacy continues. Muhammad Ali world, just as he promised he would. The reverberations of that shaking continue to be felt every time someone stands up for what they believe, refuses to accept injustice, insists on their own dignity despite a world that tries to deny it. He was, and remains, the greatest, not because we say so, but because his life proved it beyond any possibility of doubt. The championship of the world can be lost and regained, but the championship of the human spirit, once earned, lasts forever.